As we get started, I would just ask you to silence your cell phones so we do not disturb today's program. And one of the many terrific traditions at Detroit Economic Club meetings is we always begin by honoring our great country with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would just ask you to stand and join me. The flag is to my right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And kindly remain standing as our invocation today will be delivered by Rabbi Harold Loss from Temple, Israel.
Today we gather to remember the message of a brilliant play, a message about leadership and about democracy. We are thankful for those moments when being in the audience touches the spirit as deeply as when we sit in our pews. We are grateful to those who bring to us theatrical experiences that elevate the spirit while reminding us of our responsibilities. We are a link in the chain back to our founding fathers and mothers. They created a nation. Our task to leave to the next generation a country that reflects our highest ideals. May God bless us. May God bless America. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Loss. A quick but important thank you to Detroit Public Television and Lawrence Technological University for partnering with us on today's webcast. And if you've been with us before, you know we love having 80 high school and college students with us at each meeting, and today was no different. Through the generosity of our corporate sponsors, these students got to spend a good 30, 45 minutes grilling Jeffrey Seller upstairs at a private student reception. Let me just take a quick moment and tell you who's in the house with us. I would just ask you to hold your applause. Today we've got two groups of students from the Oak Park High School Drama Club. Thank you to University of Michigan and Dr. Mark Schlissel. And the second group, thank you to Dana and Christy, who represent Detroit Economic Club Young Leaders in sponsoring the second Oak Park group today. Mosaic Youth Theater, thank you Dan Alpert and Detroit Public TV. Lake Orion High School, thanks to Mike and Lisa from UPS. Cesar Chavez High School, thanks to Mark Baxton Bodman. Cranbrook High School, thank you to Coda Integrated Systems. And Regina High School, thank you to AT&T. And ladies and gentlemen, how about a round of applause to welcome the students and thank their sponsors. A couple things quickly on your table, and actually season lineup hot off the press. It didn't even make the season lineup that we printed yesterday afternoon. If you saw your email today, we're really pleased we're able to announce that we're going to be hosting a conversation in 2 weeks with Ford Motor Company CEO Jim Hackett. That'll be at Ford Field, so you'll want to get some tickets for that before they're sold out. April 17th, if you are a young leader, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell will be hosting us late afternoon in Dearborn at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. So we're looking forward to seeing you at those, and we'll be announcing more meetings soon. Also on your table is our terrific love note to our sponsors. So we would not be here today if it wasn't for the generosity of these corporate sponsors. I would ask you to take a look, patronize their businesses, thank them. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, I would love to talk to you offline about that. If you're a tweeter, we want you to tweet today. Lots of tweets, people, using @Det Economic Club. And Jeffrey Seller, the DEC, has an incredible history of speakers that I want to share with you now. March 27th is a popular date in DEC's 85-year history. You, Jeffrey, are now joining a distinguished list of 13 other speakers who graced our podium on this day. A few highlights of this eclectic bunch. It's such a great historical view of the United States. 1939, Herbert Feist, the economic advisor to Presidents Hoover and Roosevelt, spoke to the Detroit Economic Club. 1944, think of the year. George Romney Automotive Council for War Production. 1950, Gordon Gray, Secretary of the Army. 1972, a return visit from George Romney as Secretary of HUD. And then in 2006, Jamie Dimon, the awesome CEO and current CEO of JP Morgan Chase. These are people who traveled to Detroit to speak to the Detroit Economic Club, and today we're pleased to add you, Jeffrey Seller, as our 14th speaker on this day in DEC history. Thank you and congratulations. And one of the more popular elements of our DEC meetings is the last 15 minutes. We want to hear from you. So there's instructions on your table where you can submit questions via your smartphone, and Jeffrey will take on even your toughest questions as well. And those questions will make their way to our presiding officer, who I'm about to put to work. No stranger to any of us, Dr. Mark Schlissel is the president of the University of Michigan. He is a DEC board member, a great friend to the DEC, and also a great supporter of many, many things in our community, region, and state of Michigan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Mark Schlissel.
Hi, everybody, and thank you very much, Steve, and good afternoon to my fellow DEC members and guests. I want to give my own special shout out to the students who are here. We had a great session with them earlier today, and as I always find, students ask way better questions than anybody else. And also a shout out to their teachers, of course. So for the better part of a century, the DEC has offered a forum for expanding our views on the most pressing issues of the day. At the University of Michigan, part of our mission is to challenge the present and enrich the future. I'm thrilled to be here for an event that brings the values of our two institutions together and encourages us to consider new perspectives on the world. Fittingly, our speaker today is someone who spent his career redefining the status quo and using his artistic vision to help shape our society. Born and raised right here in Oak Park, Michigan, Jeffrey Seller attended the University of Michigan, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts. Now, one of the most powerful and influential forces in modern American musical theater and a 4-time Tony winner, Jeffrey has produced groundbreaking Broadway shows. These include Rent in 1996, Avenue Q in 2003, and the wildly popular Hamilton, which premiered in 2015, and is still taking Broadway and the world by storm today. Throughout his career, Jeffrey has maintained a steadfast dedication to making theater more accessible and relevant to diverse audiences. To give younger people a chance to experience Rent, Jeffrey helped to develop the first ever rush ticket system. This gave anyone willing to wait in line a shot at seeing a Broadway show for only $20. Decades later, Jeffrey's innovations have produced a whole new generation of theater enthusiasts. He's continued his focus on young people with supportive student scholarships at U of M, ensuring that the state of Michigan continues to cultivate some of the most promising talent the world over. Just recently, Jeffrey donated $1 million to the Mosaic Youth Theater. The Mosaic Youth Theater, which is dedicated to providing every child in Detroit with the opportunity to experience the power of the performing arts. Today's moderator has also advanced knowledge and understanding as a prominent journalist in Michigan. For over 2 decades, Devin Scillian has served as the evening news anchor for Detroit's WDIV Local 4. Devin's career has taken him around the globe, including to 6 Olympic Games. His coverage of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing with KFOR helped to earn the station a Peabody Award. During Devin's tenure, WDIV has received multiple prestigious regional Edward R. Murrow Awards. As if that weren't enough, Devin's also widely known as a best-selling children's author and award-winning country musician. I'm certainly looking forward to today's wonderful conversation. Please welcome Devin Scillian and Jeffrey Seller.
Thanks. Thanks, Mark. Was it superstition that kept you from mentioning a certain basketball game coming up this week? Just trying to play it cool. Done deal. There we go. I like it. Go blue. Or green. I'm all about green and white right now too. It's great to be here. I loved seeing the kids that we had earlier, the students, because years ago, that was me. I was a theater kid. I went to college at the University of Kansas originally on a theater scholarship and somewhere got waylaid off into journalism. And even my appearance in a production of the play Hair in college, which at the time I thought will preclude me from ever working in public life, did not end up holding me back. I think my theater training has served me in a lot of different ways. And then my wife and I have raised 4 theater kids, one of whom just graduated from U of M's theater program last year. Christian's right here. And the theater is so enriched the lives of my children. And I just love, there's lots of different ways that theater ends up enriching our lives. And so I am absolutely thrilled to be here with Jeffrey. And I wanted us to start today by the exact same question. Let's start the same way you just started with the students upstairs. I think people would love to know exactly what the heck it is a producer does, because if we watch the movies from the 1930s and 40s, it's a cigar-chomping impresario pinching the hiney of every showgirl that walks past. I'm not sure that's what you do every day, but explain for us what a producer does.
I look like Zero Mostel in The Producers, right? Just add another 150 pounds. The producer picks the play. It is the single most important decision I will make in the course of that trajectory. What do I want to do? And how does that choice reflect my values as a person? How does that choice affect my artistic sensibility? What words do I want to put out into the world? What statements do I want to put out into the world? That's where I start. And when people ask me, well, how do you choose? I choose from the heart. I don't know what's going to sell tickets. And I only choose to please me. And then I hope others will come along for the ride. So that's the beginning. And then my job is to be nurturer. Nurturer to the playwright, composer, lyricist, director, set designer. To give them the support they need, exhibit the patience they require, and know when is the right time to say to my creators, can you do better? Or you must do better. And that process may take 2 years, that process may take 5 years. And the other thing the producer must do is know that it will take as long as it takes. Then, once we actually have a play, a musical, we have to go sell it. And then my job becomes salesman. And that's why my last name is Seller. And that selling starts with having to sell it to the investors who are going to put money in the show to support us, sell it to perhaps the not-for-profit theater company in which we want to premiere the show, sell it to the theater landlord who always has more shows to book than he has theaters to book them into, and therefore must make decisions, sell them to the ticket buyers. And when we can't sell tickets anymore, that's when we close the show. So there's a little bit of nurture. There's a little bit of creativity. There's a little bit of marketing. And then there's putting it out into the world and seeing what they say back to us.
And the first steps on that journey, notably, happened not too far from where we're sitting right now. When you were, I think we were 13 years old when you saw your first big show at the Fisher Theater. And it lit the fuse in you, right?
Wow. Well, that's a good segue into even a bigger topic, which is that this is a big room, and for me today it feels like a very small room because I am here with so many people that I have enjoyed and respected and loved throughout my entire life. I have met friends who were at my bar mitzvah today. The rabbi who sat on the bima at my bar mitzvah is here today. My mother and my sister are here today. My cousins are here today. The president of the University of Michigan is here today. And I want to just say to everybody, it really feels good to be home. Yes, when I was 13, it was my middle school librarian who told me I needed to go see a musical that was at the Fisher Theater because it had two young boys in it who were about 13 years old on stage. And it was a musical of the Civil War called Shenandoah. It was a modestly successful musical on Broadway during that era. And so my very first experience, my dad took me to the Fisher Theater, and I think the tickets were $10 to sit in the mezzanine, $8 if you sat in the balcony, and I think it was $12 or $14 if you sat on the orchestra. So we couldn't afford it, but my mom and dad made sure we still got tickets in the middle in that mezzanine at $10. And it starred John Raitt, who was one of the greatest Broadway performers in history. And that was my first experience seeing what a Broadway show was on tour.
And you've seen some of your other shows obviously come back and succeed in your hometown of Detroit. But this one, of course, has been so spectacular in such a cosmic kind of way. What's it like to be able to bring a show like Hamilton to your hometown, to the very theater where you sat?
Yes, so I went to the show last night. I got to town yesterday, and my first activity when I get to town, no matter what I do, is I have to go check in with my company and greet everybody backstage and sit and see the show. And first of all, I was just thrilled because the Fisher Theater looks every bit as great today as it did when I went there in 1977. And I felt enveloped by that warmth of that wood, that gold, those seats, that carpet. And it always makes me feel good when an audience responds to Hamilton. And, people ask me, how many times have you seen Hamilton? I'm like, I don't know. How many times have I seen it this month? But it still feels good when that reaction comes from the audience, when I see that it is affecting people, that it is thrilling people. And when those roars rose from that audience last night, I went, okay, we're still good.
It's all good, yes.
Yeah.
We can reassure you of that too. It's interesting, you were talking about a producer deciding what needs to be said and what you want to say. When you came along pre-Rent, there was a lot of, people were trying to say interesting things, and it's not like there haven't been challenging productions before, but Broadway's also been largely marked by Carousel and Showboat and a lot of really happy things. And then here comes Rent. And you were told pretty early on, nobody wants to come watch a play about a bunch of drug addicts, strung out freaks. Yes. Talk about that process.
Yeah, I want to contextualize that a little bit more even, because I want to go back to what my friend and colleague Jonathan Larson used to say about theater on Broadway in the late 80s and early 90s. Jonathan Larson was the creator of Rent. And if you also don't know this, Jonathan Larson tragically died 4 hours after the final dress rehearsal of Rent off Broadway. He never saw Rent on Broadway. But Jonathan had a lot of opinions about Broadway. And what Jonathan used to say to me in the years in which I was nurturing Rent, and he was writing Rent, is he said, no one our age wants to go to Broadway, Jeffrey. Those aren't our stories. Those aren't our characters. That's not our music. And we couldn't afford it. And if you think about what was on Broadway in the 80s and the 90s, it was largely populated by the British pop musicals, Cats, Phantom, Les Mis, and Saigon. In fact, in that era, basically you had those 4 musicals and very little of anything else. And Jonathan wanted to write for his generation. He wanted to write in a musical vernacular that would mean something to his peers. And when we were developing Rent, we always thought Rent would be off-Broadway. You know, our greatest goal for Rent was that we'd find a garage somewhere, you know, set up 400 or 500 seats, and it would run there. That was the dream. That was the Rent dream. And there was a moment when I was watching Rent in its 150-seat off-Broadway theater, in which I thought, if this can't work on Broadway, then I can't work on Broadway. So damn the torpedoes, we're going to bring this show to Broadway. And our advertising agency, our lawyers, they said to us meaning my business partner Kevin and I, no one who wants to see Rent is going to go to Broadway, and no one who goes to Broadway is going to want to go see Rent. And I thought, so be it. If that's the way it turns out, I'm willing to risk that, because then I guess I won't work on Broadway. I'll go find something else to do. And when we got to Broadway, what we discovered is that there was a very, very large audience for Rent, and that Rent gave voice to an entire generation of people that had never heard their music on Broadway, or had never, more important, seen people like them on Broadway or their stories on Broadway. A musical that in 1996 featured a group of characters that were, defined by a gay couple, a lesbian couple, a straight couple, homeless people, heroin-addicted people, and many characters suffering from AIDS. And that was the kind of story I wanted to tell.
As you look through a lot of your shows, there's you clearly have a subversive streak. Avenue Q with puppets having sex on stage, all the way through to where we are today with Hamilton. And yet, it's not enough to flip over a table. You have clearly found the sweet
It's when a puppet flips over a table that you know you're in trouble.
That's right, that's right. But you have clearly found the sweet spot of being subversive for more than the sake of just subversiveness. There's a strength in what you're saying that is more than just somebody just sort of making a lot of commotion and trying to upset the natural balance of things on Broadway. How do you find that, okay, this might be too far, no, this is just right? Or do you ever think that way?
I didn't set out to be subversive. I knew that I wasn't going to ever be the producer of a traditional song and dance, tap dancing musical.
Well, in fact, even when you did a revival, it wasn't Sound of Music, it was West Side Story.
Yeah, it was West Side Story, in which all of the Puerto Ricans spoke in their native language.
Right.
Which was an act of giving them their voices back. And that subversive idea was hatched by West Side Story's original book writer, Arthur Lawrence, who I worked with and who directed it, and he was 91 years old when we did it. And it was Arthur that said, we're going to do this, and we're going to let the Puerto Ricans speak Spanish. And I said, that's the reason to do West Side Story today. Yeah.
Well, and then I'll repeat another part of the story you just told the students. When you're starting to put together something like Hamilton and you're getting into casting, and he said, well, it was obvious to me that George Washington had to be an African American. It was obvious to you. Well, that's, I think, a pretty good indicator of where you are kind of on being out front and in thinking in a new and unique way. What's obvious to you was never obvious to anybody else. But talk then a little bit, let's move into Hamilton about how different that was.
Well, the notion of being able to cast a company that looks like who we are, it goes back a long way, and certainly Rent embodied that as well as anything else. And in fact, it was Arthur Lawrence, who I'd known for a number of years and I had enormous respect for because he wrote West Side Story and Gypsy, and also movies like The Turning Point and The Way We Were. And Arthur was like, I didn't like Rent that much, Jeffrey, but it's the first integrated musical, and I like that. That there were black people and white people and Asian people and Latino people on the stage, and no one was commenting about it. That's not what the show was about. It was just what Rent was. And it was Arthur who perceived that. And when Lynn was writing in the, I almost said In the Heights, which of course was another show that incorporated Cubanos, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, African Americans. And so we'd had a lot of history with wanting to show those voices because they deserve that voice. And they're great voices. And when he was writing Hamilton, he was writing to flex all of his muscles in the world of rap and hip hop. And he started by saying, I'm going to write an album in which I don't have to be a slave to musical theater storytelling. I just want to write a great hip-hop album. And you know what my job was to say at that point? Yes. We say yes. It's not like, oh, is that a good idea or a bad idea? It's, Lynn, if you want to do that, I'm with you on that. And he kept writing those songs, and then it was obvious that African Americans were going to sing those songs because hip hop is the great American contribution of African Americans over the last 35 years. And it just made sense. So yeah, Chris Jackson, our friend, was gonna play George Washington. And it made sense that Daveed Diggs was gonna play Thomas Jefferson, who was a pal of Tommy Kail's and Lynn's, and we would fly him in on JetBlue every time we were doing a reading to play Thomas Jefferson and Lafayette. So we didn't think about it that much. That's just what Lynn was writing. And what the genius of that was, and I'm giving that credit to Lynn and to Tommy more than I am to myself, I supported it, of course, was that what they were doing is they were writing the history of America as it was with America as it is. And that then says, it's all of our story.
Theater does give us this great opportunity to hold a mirror up to ourselves. And so obviously, almost by its very nature, it's political. I'm curious how you feel about the politicization of a play. When we've got, when you had the stretch there where you've got certain conservative lawmakers coming to see the show and being either chastised or booed out of the place, I'm curious as to how you felt about that. And if you chase those people out, you end up really preaching to the converted. They're the one. I'm assuming from what you're saying, those are the ones you'd like to see the show.
Great. You ready? I got it.
No. In fact, we have another moment right now on Broadway with To Kill a Mockingbird. Every American should find a way to see this new Aaron Sorkin version of To Kill a Mockingbird. It is unreal. And I worry I worry that the ones that are making the effort to see it are the ones who kind of get it, right? Yeah.
Well, first of all, one of the great things about Hamilton, which we noticed as soon as we opened at the Public Theater downtown, the same theater in which A Chorus Line opened in 1975, in which Hair opened in 1967, was that conservatives were coming and enjoying and appreciating the show as much as liberals. And one of the first and best op-eds that were written about Hamilton downtown was by the speechwriter Peggy Noonan from George H.W. Bush. And Peggy wrote an op-ed saying, every American needs to see this, but most particularly, every Republican who's going to run for president in 2016 needs to see this. And that was Peggy Noonan. And believe it or not, Dick Cheney came to see the show with his wife, who had just written what I understood was a pretty great biography of James Madison down at the Public, and they loved the show. I think Lynn tweeted something about, you know, the second vice president who shot somebody was in our theater today. Remember he shot that guy on a hunting trip, his friend? If that's your friend, so and I'm going to give you all the good stuff before we get to the stuff you want to talk about, which is Mike Pence, and we'll get there. But you know, we have a Hamilton education program in which we are bringing to the theater kids from Title I schools, from New York and now from all over America. They come to see the show for $10. They do an incredible integrated education program leading up to the day when they come see the show. They perform their own performance pieces on our stage, reflecting the themes, the music, the characters, the poetry of Hamilton. And it was the 100% Republican state legislature of Utah that said, we will put up all of the money for our EduHam in Salt Lake City. So this play is for everyone. Now, politicization. 10 days after the election of 2016, it was a Friday, so it was like 2 weeks later, and I, on a Friday at around 4 o'clock, got a phone call from one of my deputies saying, Jeffrey, we just got a call that Mike Pence wants to come see Hamilton tonight. And under normal circumstances, I wouldn't even get the phone call, but this was different. And the reason this was different was because the day after the election, I had to go to that theater with my own feelings and help 50 people figure out how to do a show that day. I had to go to that theater the day after the election and hear a Mexican American say, I don't feel like I belong anymore. I had to go to that theater with actors who were crushed, enraged, and most important, felt that somehow what had just transpired meant that we were a little bit less part of the American dream. And now this man who was completely tied up with Trump and the hate that he spewed during that election and the denigration that he manifested during that election was coming to see our play. And I didn't know if I could ask the actors to perform for him. I was like, what are we gonna do? I don't want to say no. I mean, if he wants to, but he was coming through the back door, meaning he didn't just go buy a ticket. He called the landlord and said, can I buy a ticket 6 hours before the show? I'll buy it. And I thought, well, if he's going to buy a ticket through that way, we're going to do something. We're not going to let this go. We're not going to let this go. So I called Lynn and Tommy, and I said, Pence is coming tonight, and I think we should do a speech. And I pulled out my cell phone, and I had written one in 5 minutes. And then the two of them, and I said to Tommy, who's our most cautious of the three of us, and I said, I know we're not going to do this, but, and then I read the speech, and he said, oh, I think we should do this. And Lynn said, I think we should do this. And we got Lynn on the phone. He was in London shooting Mary Poppins. And then after that, I went to the office, I went to the theater, I got our troops together, and we fashioned this speech to Mike Pence saying, we are America, and we need you to represent us too. And I don't think that that is a normal thing in the theater, and I don't think it should be done on a regular basis, but this was not normal, and it's one of the events I'm most proud of in the history of Hamilton.
And he kind of took issue a second ago when I suggested a certain subversive streak. The last thing I wanted to get to before we get to other questions, I think a lasting legacy of yours, along with all the wonderful shows, something that even your competitors have had to adapt to, is this trying to get more people the ability to see the shows. Tickets have gone out of sight for even vice presidents who want to come see the show. It is a really expensive night to see a Broadway show. You, with Rent, started trying to make sure that people with very little money had the ability to get into the theater. That is expanded now to so many shows. Almost all of them try to do what you've been doing. How, though, have you done it? Because we've got this lottery. We talk a lot about the $10 tickets that you can get for Hamilton. But how do you make sure that it's still not the scalpers and the ticket brokers and it's still not getting mucked up somewhere in the system? Because the system always seems a step ahead, doesn't it?
Yes. Thank you for that. I want to just contextualize that lottery system, which is that when we were about to bring Rent to Broadway in 1996, I was 31 years old, my business partner Kevin was 33 years old, and we could still barely afford a full-price ticket for a Broadway show, and we were bringing a Broadway show. And we thought, we have to find a way to make sure that people can afford to see Rent regardless of their ability to pay. And we decided $20 would be that barometer. And then we thought, you know what? We were not the first ones to create what is known as a rush ticket. Miss Saigon was selling similar types of tickets, but they were putting them all the way in the back of the rear mezzanine. And we thought, what if we flip it on its head and we put the first 2 rows of the orchestra as the $20 tickets, and then our most rabid fans will be in the front row, and they will start the energy that goes all the way back to the rear of the mezzanine. And we started by saying you have to show up and get in line. And with 1 year into the run on Broadway of Rent, we would get a weekend where you'd get 3 lines going simultaneously: the Friday night line, the Saturday matinee line, and the Saturday night line. And kids were sleeping over on 41st Street over the weekend. And this was before the New York Times moved in, and this was when 41st Street was pretty derelict. We were afraid someone was going to get killed. And that's when we converted to a lottery on site, where we would actually put your name in the hat, and we would pick your name out of the hat. And we lived with that system all the way through the beginning of Hamilton on Broadway, but then it became something where it was so big. What actually happened with Hamilton then is then Lynn started coming out and doing a little show during the lottery every night. So then we were having the show before the show, and before you knew it, a car could not pass on 46th Street because we would have 2,000 people show up just for the lottery. And then that led the lottery to go into our pockets on the Hamilton app, which I encourage all of you to download and keep entering. Because we do the lottery, we'll do the lottery 6 times today, and all 6 of the Hamilton companies from London all the way to San Francisco. And that was how we could help serve that value. And one of the other ways I always believed we could serve that value is if we also overcharge the rich. Because they'll pay. And that helps pay for the poor. So we were always doing a little bit of Robin Hood ticketing.
And you kept them out of the front rows because they won't clap.
Exactly. But what now you're bringing into this conversation, Devin, is this whole new thing, which is that there's two things we need to know. One is that reselling tickets is a legal act in the United States of America. Two is reselling tickets, or the more odious term, scalping, started in the 19th century. By the way, and it didn't start in London, it started in the United States, of course. And we've lived with it through all these years. And once scalping was able to use the internet and digital technology, it was able to overcome anybody else's ability to get a ticket through Ticketmaster or any of those other legitimate systems. So when you're going to StubHub, SeatGeek, all of those other places, they're legal, they're okay, but what they're doing is they're enabling arbitrage day traders to go in and use fancy software to get those tickets when they go on sale faster than you ever can with a keystroke. And believe me, their software can overcome those things where you have to say, check every box that's a traffic light. Forget it. They've got that down in a nanosecond. So now they're in, they bought all the tickets, and then they go and resell them. What we've tried to do to control that is create laws. So in New York, we created a law that doesn't allow bots, which are the robots that go in and do that. And we even got legislation passed at the end of the Obama administration that may have been the only bipartisan piece of legislation that passed that year in Congress. But having said that, we're always trying to stay ahead of them, and because the economic incentive is so strong, there will always be smart folks who go out, buy tickets, and sell them at a high rate. And it's for that reason that I go out and we ourselves sell tickets in New York, a few tickets every night for $850, because it is fair that if someone wants to pay $850 to see the show, it should go to the authors of the show, it should go to the investors of the show, and the people that made the show, not to day traders.
Yeah, It's a really important and noble effort, because all the way back to the Greeks through the Elizabethans, theater needs to be for everybody, has to be. So go ahead. If it's not clear yet, I could sit here and ask questions till tomorrow morning at sunrise.
You can sit there, but you have to discipline yourself not to answer them.
I'm going to do what I can.
All right. So these are questions submitted by the audience, including our students. The first is, Jeffrey, how do you see technology and on-demand companies like Netflix and Amazon Prime impacting the theater and its demands?
I think that the digital revolution has played an interesting role in helping us to be better marketers at the theater, in helping us to deliver our lottery tickets in an easier way to you, in helping me to advertise to the right people. It's actually I think it's been a boon to us to sell tickets. And I think that the digital world in which you get on an elevator and all of us are looking at our phones, me included. You get on a subway in New York, everybody's looking at their phone. I think that, and everybody's now home watching, Roma on Netflix, I did, is creating a world where we want to go out, right? That's why you're here. Because we want to be together, we want to go out, we want to share experiences. And as a result, I think that no matter what this world brings, the theater is going to be strong. It has been, the last 4 or 5 years on Broadway have been some of the strongest years ever. And there's nothing, they can't take away live theater and the special feeling we get from it. And therefore, I have enormous optimism about the future of theater as it regards the digital revolution.
That's exactly the same way I feel about online education. Honestly, you can't take away that personal human interaction element. So one of the fun things here of helping host Jeffrey is watching the community react to him and sort of welcome him home. And as he mentioned earlier, the people that he hasn't seen since he graduated high school, or the rabbi that was up on the bima for his bar mitzvah. And perhaps we'll ask you to engage in a bit of nostalgia and fill in the narrative arc for us of what the influences were of Detroit, your hometown, the University of Michigan, that actually leads you to make sense of your life as it's progressed. Gotcha, huh?
Right. Well, one, I'm blessed by my life. And two, you know, this room here, I can go from being in the Purim play to being in the play at Stagecrafters in 7th grade, to being at the Little Theater at Oak Park High School in The Pajama Game, and then we go to the University of Michigan, and Judy Craig is here, who played Rizzo in our production of the soft show Grease in 1984, and this other gentleman was in it as well, and Andrew Lippa was the music director, and then we go to New York, and then we both direct community theater at Temple Road of Shalom on West 83rd Street, the Reform Temple in New York City, where they do shows, and then I get them to do a new musical that I did in Ann Arbor at Young People's Theater at the Performance Network with Andrew Lippa and Rachel Urist, and then we make it into a musical, and we get the Temple to pay for it, because I know how to get the Temple to pay for things. And then this guy, Jonathan Larson, I hear he has a rock monologue going on at this small performance space on the Upper West Side, and I see that, and I write him a letter the next day, and I say, I want to produce your musicals, and he sends me a letter, and he says, please produce your musicals, and then I get fired from my job, and then I start a new company with Kevin McCollum, and now we're booking shows all over, and then Jonathan has this little thing called Rent, and it's La Bohème, it's in the East Village, Mimi has AIDS instead of tuberculosis, and then Jonathan dies. And then we're reminded that the course is never clear. And I knew the day he died that Rent was going to become a phenomenon. Because it's like he wrote his death in the show. And I was like, how? You know, he died of an aortic aneurysm. Who dies of an aortic aneurysm? Not many people when they're 35 years old. And I don't know why that happened. I don't think there is any why that happened. But how I make sense of my life is that making all this stuff, from the Purim play to Grease to Stagecrafters, I make sense of my life by making stuff. And that's why right now I'm making 4 new things, because that's how I say I was here.
Makes perfect sense.
This is like a psychoanalyst conversation.
Well, just
we
the
don't even need a
telling of that
couch.
story, just the telling of that story showed a pretty good understanding of theater, I thought, didn't you?
So the last question I'll ask you before we get to the lightning round might violate a proprietary idea, but Jeffrey and I were talking at the table, and I'm always trying to lure spectacular, gifted storytellers and teachers to the University of Michigan. He said he always wanted to teach a course. So I'll advertise, you know, get your children or grandchildren ready, because we're going to lure Jeffrey to U of M. But if you don't mind, tell them the concept that you had for this course you want to teach.
Yeah, well, when people have asked me what I teach in the past and stuff, sometimes they ask, will you teach like how to produce theater management? And I never want to do that. But how does theater and music and art intersect with our socio-political culture in the United States of America? How does Jackson Pollock intersect with Leonard Bernstein in the 1950s that gives rise to Pollock's best paintings and this new sound on Broadway with West Side Story? And how are both of them influenced by the Eisenhower era and the McCarthy hearings in the early 50s? And you know, one of the things I've thought about as a growing adult, I'm still figuring out the world, is, you know, where is the intersection of these different artistic forms, and how is all of it informed by the events of the day? And then you could go and ask yourself the same thing about how Angels in America gives rise in 1990, and what are the forces that go along with that?
So sign up now for the waiting list. So now the lightning round. Isn't there a TV show that does the lightning round? Jeffrey, all quick answers. Something on your bucket list.
Teacher at the University of Michigan.
Well played. A person other than a family member you'd like to have lunch with.
Barack Obama.
One of your favorite songs.
Both sides now.
Favorite team growing up.
T-E-E-N?
Team, not team.
Oh, team.
I don't want to hear about your old girlfriends. Team, sports
I
team.
knew you didn't want to hear about that. Fuck if I know. I don't have a favorite team. The Wolverines.
Oh, there you go. All right. The last book you've read.
Oh, There. Gorgeous book. Tommy Orange, Native American, takes place in Oakland. Watch, it'll win the Pulitzer Prize next month. There, Tommy Orange.
One of your favorite movies.
Goodfellas.
How about a favorite vacation spot?
They're all good. A favorite vacation spot. That would be where I go to my house in Sagaponack, New York, in Eastern Long Island, anytime I can, which is not for the last 3 months.
Describe Detroit in one word.
Hot.
And the very last question, what advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
Don't despair.
Jeffrey Seller, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.